Good morning and happy Sabbath.
Good morning.
Before we go live, I'd like to take a minute. Oops, sorry, we are. My most humble apologies. I had something I wanted to say. Now it doesn't matter. I would like to say to many people, thank you for coming. We're few in numbers today, and Norma is doing everything on her own today back in the sound room. And so thank you, Norma.
Amen.
Kim, we will be out of town, and since you already know about the surprise, happy birthday. And again, thank you for coming. Good morning and happy Sabbath. Guten Morgen, Thor Sabbat, Feliz Sábado a todos, buenos días. Gracias, depending on whether it's Italy or Spain. And so today, regardless of what language we know God in, regardless of our affiliation with religion, I would like to thank everyone. And do not hold today against God. If I make a mistake, it's on me. Don't blame God. It's not that I have really big shoulders, but I want to make sure that no one would ever not come to church because of me. Normally, people do that. You can find, Elder John has taught me quite a bit. One of the things I remember him telling me is that you can find anything you want in church. You can find a reason to come back. You can find a reason never to go back. You can find anything you want. And so with that, I would like to open with prayer. And thank you once again. Eternal Father in heaven, we do thank you. We thank you for everything you've done for us. The gifts of life, the gift of sunlight, and the true light that Jesus brings us. In the holy name of Jesus, amen. You know, first of all, I wear hearing aids and glasses, so I'll apologize straight up front. I'm not wearing the microphone, so I'm going to be stuck to the podium. I can't, be walking around. And it was just too inconvenient to wear 3 apparatuses. So if we're doing well, great. Years ago, I watched a documentary on bear attacks. And this young man was walking down the hills out of Sheridan, Wyoming. He was a cowboy, and he was out, I believe, elk hunting. And a storm came in from the mountains. Now, out west, the mountains somewhat create, like the lakes here, the Great Lakes, kind of create its own weather. And a storm had moved in, and he had become separated from his party. Now, his party was friends and family. And he thought, well, I'll catch up with him at the bottom of the mountain. On his trek, and if you've ever been hunting, you know you just don't trudge through there like a bunch of pathfinders, ripping things out of the forest. I mean, you're pretty quiet, and you're pretty attentive. And so, as attentive as he was, knowing that he was in bear country, he was attacked by a grizzly bear. Now, this bear didn't care what color he was, didn't care what religion he was, didn't care about his family or his financial status or his future. That bear had one thing on his mind, and that was to destroy this man. So that bear, in some regard, was just like Satan. Satan doesn't care what color you are, what political affiliation you are, what religion you are. He's going to do everything he can to destroy not only you, but your family, your country, everything you know. That is scripturally based. Conflict started in heaven. Now, I asked the pastor permission to kind of, I don't want to use the word piggyback, but it kind of comes to mind off of his sermon last week. because of the conflict series, it really stuck. 1 Samuel really stuck to me. And so I asked him, he said, yeah. So after getting this done and making like 40 changes, even this morning, it's not really piggybacking on his sermons. The only thing that really is real similar would be the word conflict. But conflict started where? In heaven itself. Then it came here. Pivotal point being the Garden of Eden. It's still here today. We've never been able to shake that. I'll give you a brief summary, and today might be a short sermon, and there's no potluck, so I can't use that as an excuse to cut it quicker. But 1 Samuel 3, God chooses Samuel as a prophet. In 1 Samuel 4, Israel loses the battle to the Philistines. Horribly, horribly. They are slaughtered. Again, in 1 Samuel chapter 4, Israel not only loses, but they lose the Ark of the Covenant. They brought out the Ark of the Covenant for protection. They were losing and being slaughtered so badly, they brought out the Ark to save them. And not only did they lose the Ark, but they were even slaughtered more and more. Now, in 1 Samuel chapter 6, the Ark is returned to the Philistines. Does anybody remember why? Bad luck. They had made reference to the God of Israel in what had happened where? In Egypt. So they said, whoa, I don't want this. Take it back. In chapter 7, Samuel, the prophet Samuel, judges Israel. And let's turn to chapter 7. Verse 3. Now they're talking about picking who? They're wanting to pick a king. They're wanting to pick a leader. And so they parade all these people by. Verse 3 says, Then Samuel spoke to all the house of Israel, saying, If you return to the Lord with all of your heart, not a little bit, not a grain of sand, not something that's convenient, but commit to God 100%. Then put away the foreign gods and the Ashtoreth. What is that word, Ashtoreth? I wasn't sure what it was. Rick, you probably know what that is. You don't? Yeah, well, recently you quoted that to me, but in a different phrase. It is the fertility god. And that's interesting because where do we get Easter? From among you, and prepare your hearts for the Lord, and serve him only, and he will deliver you from the hand of the Philistines. And so the children of Israel put away the Baals and the Ashtoreths, and served the Lord only. And Samuel said, Gather all Israel to Mizpah, and I will pray to the Lord for you. So they gathered together at Mizpah, drew water and poured it out for the Lord. And they fasted that day and said, We have sinned against the Lord. And Samuel judged the children of Israel at Mizpah. They repented. They knew they were in trouble. The last resort, foxhole religion. They repented. In chapter 8, Israel wants a leader. They want a king. And so starts the story of David and Saul. In chapter 15, the prophet Samuel gives God's orders to who? To Saul. What does Saul do?
What he wants.
Disobeyed. Saul disobeyed God. And what does God do? In chapter 15, verse 10 and 11. Now the word of the Lord came to Samuel, saying, I greatly regret that I have set up Saul as a king, for he has turned back from the following from me, and has not performed my commandments. And it grieved Samuel, and he cried out to the Lord all night. You ever done that? Prayed all night? Very little sleep, in and out, constantly praying. Something grieved you or impacted your life so bad. The loss of one, the loss of a love, the loss of a family member, maybe something that's a health issue. He grieved all night. So when Samuel rose early in the morning to meet Saul, it was told Samuel, saying, Saul went to Carmel, and indeed he has set up a monument for himself, and has gone on around, passed by, and gone down to Gilgal. What was the monument? It was a monument of victory. I just recently looked that up. And it was a monument to his own victory. Not for God, for himself. Do we do that? Can we do that? In chapter 16, it says, I'm going to read my note here. It just says, may I suggest that this is the true heart of all spiritual conflicts. But we have the power to make the decisions. The only way for me to do that is to open my heart first, and pray honestly and give my all to God and let Him lead and teach me. I can't do that on my own. I can't make a little checklist and go, oh, I'm so good. Look at this. Now, I make a lot of jokes, sometimes a little sarcastic, a little dry humor. Things like, well, I'm not very smart. I'm not a doctor, not a lawyer, I'm not from Mayo. But that's true. Some of us are so stuck on things, we can't see the forest through the trees. Samuel is the history and lessons to be learned about two men. Can we learn from that? Their lives, their choices, and their deaths. Here we have a sheep herder, the youngest of the brothers, wasn't he? David. And a warrior that was made king. Saul is disobedient in chapter 15. God's Spirit leaves him. Have you ever felt left alone? Really alone? And have you ever left God? Have you ever left God? And when you came back, was it easy? It was harder to come back each time. Even a little bit of a sliver. Well, I did this. I asked for forgiveness. I'm forgiven. I can move on. When I realized that my sin wasn't turning my back on God, it was driving the nails into Jesus Christ at Calvary. It wasn't just that I could be forgiven and move on. That's so convenient. That's so, I don't know what to call it. But when that moment came for me, it really did change my life. It was just as big of an impact as when I decided to be baptized. And that was back in the 70s. And with that journey, with that growth, I've seen a lot. I've felt a lot. And my senses, in some regard, became better, some regard not so good. The disobedience in chapter 15 of Saul became so troubling that God withdrew His Spirit. What happens then? Saul consults a medium. What is a medium? Yeah, most of us kind of align that with Halloween, right? You know, there she goes, you know, a witch. And so what does this medium tell him? Well, in chapter 28, I believe it was. How would you like to hear these words? How would you like to be told, dude, tomorrow you and your family is going to be dead. You and your family, all of you, you're going to be dead. Not something we all want to hear, but something we all have to face eventually. In 1 Samuel 31, Saul and all three of his sons and the armor bearer are dead. Why would the armor bearer kill himself? Was he afraid of Saul's followers, what they would do to him for not taking care of Saul? King Saul, the leader. So what happened to Saul? Well, back in chapter 10, let me go to that. Chapter 10, verse 9. And so it was when he had turned his back to go from Samuel that God gave him another heart. He's talking about Saul. Saul has a new heart. I could use one of those. And all those signs came to pass that day. And when they came there to the hill, there was a group of prophets to meet him. And the Spirit of God came upon him, and he prophesied among them. So not only was Saul chosen as king, not only was he given a new heart, he was given the gift of prophecy. What did he do with it? Took it for granted. He made it about himself. Excuse me. Made it about himself. In chapter 28, that's where his fate starts to unfold. Did Saul choose his own fate? Was he a dead man walking? Spiritually, not just physically. He knew the outcome. He knew what was going to happen. And he still chose. Unwisely, but he chose. We can also do the same. Up till our last heartbeat, we can choose. But if we allow ourselves to become so blindsided or so calloused, so removed, so earthly, we're choosing our own fate. We can't hide in a bubble. We can't live in a bubble. We have to be associated with our work, with our families, with the world itself. But like a Christian in the world, it's kind of like a ship in the ocean. You can have a ship or a boat in the ocean, but you can't have the boat filled with the ocean. It's not good. Leads to failure. Excuse me. So why did Saul choose that? Was he afraid of what was going to happen? Did he choose death because he was afraid of failure? Was he afraid of what the Philistines were going to do to him, which I'm sure would not be pleasant? He would rather take that than to come back to God? Or did he even try? Have you ever missed something? Have you ever really missed something? Maybe a favorite food? Ice cream. Where's Greg? Ice cream. I bet he would miss ice cream. I would. How about a love? Have you ever lost some of your vision or all of it? Nancy was blind for about a month. I lost one eye for 17 months. And the other eye just saw stars and burst and so forth. So a year and a half later, I got both eyes back. And I want to tell you, I really appreciate having my vision. But if you've never had it, how can you miss it? I just don't believe that you can miss what you've never had. How about that love you dreamed of? You know, these love novels. If you've never had that, how can you miss it? The love you gave but never came back. It was always unequal. Why is that? Maybe it's in your head. But if you've never known Jesus and you're non-Christian, how could you miss him? If we go to church and we just go to church, and I'm not pointing fingers, my image in my mirror is who I'm looking at. If we just go and we're a bench warmer, are we really believing? Are we living what we believe? And if so, I can guarantee you one thing, especially in a work environment or out in the world, if you try to live what you believe, you're radical. You're a weirdo. And they will try to devour you and ruin your life. Because on that journey of trying to live what I believed, I made a lot of mistakes. And because of my mistakes, maybe somebody didn't come to church. Maybe somebody didn't come to Jesus Christ. Will I ever know those? Not all of them, but I'm aware of some of them. You know, so what if Saul was overtaken with grief? Have you ever been so grieved you can't function? You can't eat? You can't sleep? Maybe you shake. Maybe you have other medical issues because of your stress. You can't even function. You are so overwhelmed. What if Saul went through that? Well, I could identify with some of that. How about such sorrow and overwhelming heaviness of being separated from God and how it weighed on him? Now, this guy, in my opinion, was impatient, arrogant, selfish. He disobeyed God's orders and sought a witch for counsel. We can do that asking our buddies at work, non-spirit-filled people, reading or watching the wrong things. That's staining our character. That is staining our spirit. That is staining the temple of God. In my opinion, and you can reference that. The feeling of hopelessness, of being without God, of being lost without God, unable to bring yourself back to him, the depth and weight of sorrow, yet he couldn't come back. Did God refuse him because of his disobedience? Did God refuse him because of his heart? Or both? If we cannot miss what we never had, but come to know Jesus Christ, only by him, through him, and his Spirit will we ever know God as a whole. And God is holy. He always answers my prayers. I just don't like some of the answers because there's yes, no, and wait. And I'm not the most patient person. God, grant me patience and give it to me now. You know, a life like that would leave you with such an emptiness, a void of life. I got to have that new camper, that new boat, that new house. I have to have this, I have to have that. I know guys, men, not politically correct, men that have gone the umpteenth mile for their wives, and their wives still divorced them because at the end of the rainbow, they were not happy to start with. And their husbands, as much as they loved them, tried to satisfy those women, politically incorrect currently, women, with things. And it also goes the other way around, where women have gone the extra mile in their relationship for men, and it was not fulfilled because they were looking for the wrong things. Things fluff and stuff. It's here today, it's gone tomorrow. I cannot imagine life without the Holy Spirit. If God were to remove His Spirit, if you think it's bad now, just wait a while. Can you imagine this planet without the Spirit of God anywhere? The emptiness, the void in life, it's unimaginable, a truly hopeless future, an abyss. An abyss. Well, what is conflict? What is stress? Stress can be defined as the difference between what you want and what you get. May I suggest that we can use that same definition in conflict, because that internal conflict starts right here in our hearts. It's the difference of what we are thinking of and what we're wanting to do, and it's this and it's that, and it's an internal struggle. There's only one way to fix that. There's no magic bullet. There's no magic wand. It's a journey. It doesn't happen just right now. So if you've ever been caught up in something and you forgot God, there's hope. There is hope. But it starts in your heart. And then you have to make a decision. You really have to make that decision. You can postpone it. I did. I came to God, and for a short time I loved God. I couldn't handle the stress of life and the things that I was going through. You know, when I was a kid, I don't get real personal. I try to avoid that because I found that personal information can be used like ammunition, it can be used back at you. So I'm a little more reserved, a little more cautious. My life isn't an open book to everybody. And that's because of my history. But when I was a kid on a cabin cruiser of my mom's out in the Pacific Ocean, I used to run up and down the rails on the side of that boat. And I loved it. Foggy mornings, watch where you're putting your feet. You might wind up in the ocean. Well, one time we were out, and it was foggy, it was cold. This is Southern California. This is right out of San Pedro, California. And I thought, well, I don't want to risk going down the rail, so I cut through the galley in the bedroom area, popped up in the front hatch, jumped up on the bow, and discovered that the fog was starting to lift, and it was starting to get warmer. The moisture was starting to leave. So I was going to peel off my sweatshirt and jump in. But on the back of that boat was 3 or 4 guys, and they all had these really long fishing rods. Wasn't sure what they were doing. I was like 10, 11 years old. And so I asked my mom, "Hey, Mom, can I go swimming?" She said, "No, wait a while. Just wait a while." "Oh, Mom, come on." "No, you need to wait." Minutes later, they started pulling in sharks. Now, one of the sharks was on the back deck next to the engine compartment, and my stepdad was taking a knife and just riddling this thing like Swiss cheese. And my grandfather just kind of grinned, not a man of a lot of words, pointed to a soft spot behind that shark's head. And it was about the size of a nickel, maybe bigger. And he stabbed that shark one time in that soft spot. Lights out, that was the end of it, all over. No more snapping at you and trying to eat you or bite you. And I'm standing right there. It's pretty scary to have that large of a creature, you know, and it was a smaller shark. It was only about 6+ feet. But it was going nuts. I mean, it was going crazy trying to snap and get at somebody. And so that soft spot, hitting the right spot, turned the lights out on that shark forever. Where's your soft spot? Where's my spiritual soft spot? What am I doing with it? And who can turn that out? I am the only one that can preserve or kill the spiritual soft spot in my heart. I am the one in control. I can tell Satan no. I can tell Jesus Christ yes. It's my decision. I can't blame my mom. That's what the pastor was saying last week. Well, you can blame your mom. You can do this. You can do that. We live in a world we want to blame everybody for everything. It's not a time to be politically correct and say things like man up, cowboy up, stuff like that. Oh, no, masculinity is something that's being done away with. Well, so is womanhood. Another subject, another day. In closing, I'd like to read some notes that I have in the back of my Bible, and they've been there for years. And I'd like to share those with you. I didn't plan on this until last night. But bear with me. In Matthew 24:36, talks about Jesus coming. On page 695, EGW in Evangelism, talks about the promises and threatenings of God are alike conditional. They're not set in stone. They're changeable. We can change that. We are reliving biblical history, in my opinion. We are on our way to Babylon. We can change that if we come back to God. You know, had Judah repented, they wouldn't have been punished. In 2 Peter 2:20-22, that's what we do. We return to sin like a dog returns to his own regurgitation. But I stand firm, not perfect. By no means am I ever perfect or good. But Isaiah 25:9, excuse me, behold, this is our God. Give me a moment. I want to read something I wrote some time ago because somebody had really taken something out of context. And let us not scoff at others, but when they speak and share their hearts, but be patient, be compassionate, and understanding as Jesus is with us. So in closing, our final song, our closing song,